It looks like we're ready to go here, so we will start the meeting. I'd like to have everybody take a look at the minutes for the November 1st meeting and approve those.
A motion to approve the meeting minutes?
Motion, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Is there any unfinished business that anybody wants to address? Okay, hearing none, we'll start with new business, which is a review of the International Fire Code, all the remaining chapters.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to just start off here. So last meeting, we went through chapters 1 through 27. We're going to cover the remainder of the fire code today. But I did want to bring one thing back in front of you from a chapter that we covered last time, and that was chapter 11, which is the existing construction requirements for existing buildings. We had presented that to you as deleting that chapter in its entirety. And through the course of the review at the inspections department of covering the International Property Maintenance Code, they brought in several sections in there that refer back over to chapter 11. So we have two sections that I'd like to present to you quickly before we get started on the remainder of this that we'd like to bring in through chapter 11 because they're also going to come in through the Property Maintenance Code. And so if you could turn to page 205, it's the way the amendment will read now, instead of deleting chapter 11 in the entirety, is it'll say chapter 11 is hereby deleted with the exception of sections 1103.8 and 1103.9. And what these two sections are the smoke alarm and carbon monoxide alarm requirements for existing residential and group I1 occupancies. So in effect, this doesn't have that much impact except for probably single-family homes that are being maybe transferred ownership. Otherwise, when you were going in and doing remodel or work, those would typically require them to be brought up anyway. So the inspections department would be looking for ways to put in smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. If you read the exceptions, the first exception to both of these for the smoke and carbon monoxide alarm is that, number one, is that if you have what was in effect at the time and that was covered smoke and seal, then that's fine. Number two is additional alarms aren't required. And then the third one is that, let's see here, I don't want to. Yeah, that you can, smoke detectors connected to a fire alarm system can substitute. But the other ones I wanted to call to your attention was the interconnection, because the interconnection is not required unless the building is undergoing alterations or remodeling. So essentially what we're looking at is that this requirement would require that you put in either battery-powered smoke alarm, and then you could wirelessly interconnect them, and the carbon monoxide, your battery-powered or a plug-in unit suffices. So it's not to the same level. If you're not remodeling your house, it's not requiring you to go in and string power like you would today, where they're hardwired and then interconnected. So, and again, those will come up with chapter 7 of the International Property Maintenance Code. So if there's no comments or questions on that, then I'll hand it over to Inspector Garvey, and he'll cover chapters 28 through 39.
All right, thank you. Starting out with chapter 28, the significant change we have is 2810.1 through 2810.11, outdoor storage of pallets and pallet manufacturing and recycling facilities. This new section adds criteria for outdoor pallet storage and pallet manufacturing facilities and pallet recycling facilities. It provides specific height limits and separation to property lines and buildings, but also allows for distances to be modified based on providing additional fire protection features. That was the only significant change in chapter 28. 29 doesn't have significant changes. That's manufacturing of organic coatings. Chapter 30 is industrial ovens. There were no changes in that. Chapter 31 is tents, temporary special event structures, and other membrane structures. The significant changes are 3103.3.1, special amusement buildings. Special amusement buildings located in temporary tents are required to be equipped with automatic sprinkler protection. 3103.6, construction documents. Temporary tents and membrane structures are required to provide construction documents which address their structural stability and load carrying capacity. Larger tents and membrane structures have been added to the list of temporary facilities which must comply. Still in 31, we got 3104.2, flame propagation performance treatment. The application of testing for flame spread for tents and membrane structures has been clarified. 3105, temporary special event structures. The requirements for temporary stage structures are expanded to include all temporary structures greater than 400 square feet when used at special events. 3105.9 is portable fire extinguishers, adding the requirement for portable fire extinguishers. 3106, outdoor assembly events. This section adds requirements to outdoor public gatherings and improves the correlation of the requirements in the IBC and IFC, added in response to several fatal events related to outdoor public gatherings. So the scope, 3106.1, outdoor assembly events shall comply with this section. 3106.2, general, we have a Fargo amendment here. Outdoor assembly events with planned attendance exceeding 1,000 people shall be in accordance with this section and section 403.12. Temporary structures erected for outdoor assembly events shall comply with this chapter. This amendment will set the threshold where events shall be required to comply with the safety requirements from section 3106. So in the, without the Fargo amendment, there's not the 1,000 people requirement. 3106.2.1, approval required. Outdoor assembly events shall be approved by the fire code official. 3106.2.2, section 105.6.36 is being deleted through an amendment, and the City of Fargo is currently working on developing event permits, and there are several legal requirements that will need to be met through that process. Section 3106.4.1 through 3106.4.7, public safety for events. This section specifies requirements concerning planning, weather monitoring, crowd management, portable fire extinguishers, designated smoking areas, combustible vegetation, and combustible refuse. 3106.5 through 3106.5.3, cooking appliances and devices. This section specifies requirements for concession stands or booths using cooking appliances. It includes appliance separation from tents or structures, protection of appliances using oils or solids, and the use of liquefied petroleum gas. And then 3107.13, LP gas. The requirements for the use and separation of LP gas containers in and around tents and membrane structures has been revised. And then we move into Chapter 32, high-piled combustible storage. First significant change is 3201.3.1, approved construction. Copy of the approved plans needs to be maintained on site. 32.1.3.2, approved storage layout. A floor plan shall be provided showing the location of high-piled storage area, storage heights, commodity type, required sprinkler clearance, aisle dimensions, maximum pile volume, location and classification of commodities in accordance with section 3203.8, fire department access doors, and location of valves controlling the water supply for the sprinklers. And looks like we can go past a couple pages of minor clarifications. And we can move on to chapter 33, fire safety during construction and demolition. First significant change is 3304.5, fire watch. It adds or modifies criteria for requiring fire watch, has been added to the code along with clarification to the functions and duties of fire watch personnel. 3308.1, program development and maintenance, clarifies the responsibility and availability for the fire safety program plans. 3308.4, training, requires maintenance of the training records. 3308.5, fire protection devices, requires fire protection equipment to be inspected in accordance with the fire prevention program. Chapter 34 is tire and tire storage. There were no changes. Chapter 35 is welding and other hot works, nothing significant. 36 is marinas, no changes. 37, combustible fibers, there were no changes. Chapter 38, higher education laboratories, this is an entirely new chapter. So a new chapter has been added to the IFC to specifically regulate college and university laboratories. Correlating sections have been added to a new section 427 in the IBC. Chapter 38 is a new chapter addressing the unique needs of laboratories and higher education institutions. These academic institutions often have chemistry, biology, medical, engineering, and other laboratories where hazardous materials are used. This chapter addresses both new and existing buildings and new and existing laboratories. Applying the general hazardous materials provisions has been difficult because of the ways these laboratories operate. Often there are many small labs that have very small quantities of hazardous materials that individually do not exceed the maximum allowable quantities. In aggregate, the quantities will exceed the MAQs and could result in the need for a Group H occupancy classification. However, it is believed that the lower density of hazardous materials often mitigates the overall risk. Therefore, this lower density, along with a package of additional requirements, including the concept of laboratory suites, are approved to allow laboratories to not be classified as Group H. This chapter also addresses the use of certain materials typically provided for existing buildings, not protected throughout with a sprinkler system. These allowances come with certain safety measures, such as the use of storage cabinets and fume hoods. So again, all of it's new, and we'll just hit a couple more of the provisions here. So the scope of it is higher education laboratories complying with the requirements of this chapter shall be permitted to exceed the MAQs of hazardous materials in control areas set forth in Chapter 50 without requiring them to be a Group H occupancy. So the application of this chapter, 3801.2, this chapter shall be applied as exceptions or additions to the IFC. The storage, use, and handling of hazardous materials shall comply with the provisions of Chapter 50 through 58, through 67. So the general safety provisions that they're going to have to deal with are 38.3.1.1, chemical safety plans covering operations, emergency procedure planning, and documentation shall be available in the workplace to employees and to the fire code official. These documents shall be prepared by laboratory safety personnel or special experts. 38.3.1.2, chemical handling, including receiving, transporting on site, unpackaging, and dispensing of hazardous materials, shall be carried out by persons trained in handling such a hazard. 38.3.1.3, warning signs need to be provided, same as chapter 5003.5. 3803.1.4, maintenance of equipment, machinery, and processing shall comply with the section in chapter 50. 3803.1.5, time-sensitive materials that have the potential to become hazardous during prolonged storage shall be dated when first opened. 38.3.1.6, hazardous waste storage, dispensing, and handling shall comply with this chapter and chapters 50 through 67. 38.3.1.7, new laboratories that increase the MAQs based on this chapter shall be equipped throughout with an approved automatic sprinkler system in new or existing buildings. 38.3.2, hazardous materials shall be stored in containers no bigger than 5.3 gallons for liquids, 50 pounds for solids, and 100 cubic feet for gases. The exception to this is going to be waste collection when approved. Density of class 1 flammable liquid shall not exceed 8 gallons per 100 square feet of floor area. And the exception there is waste collection areas are only limited by the MAQs in chapter 50. So section 3804 is laboratory suite construction. So to make it a laboratory suite, it needs to be constructed in accordance with this chapter and the IBC. The number of laboratory suites and percentage of MAQs of hazardous materials shall be in accordance with a table 3804.1.1. Laboratory suites shall be separated from non-laboratory areas by fire barriers in accordance with the IBC. Laboratory suite separation from each other shall be in accordance with table 38.4.1.1. Floor assembly supporting a laboratory suite shall have not less than a 2-hour fire resistance rating. The number of laboratory suites per floor shall be in accordance with table 3804.1.1. The means of egress shall be in accordance with chapter 10. Emergency or standby power shall be provided per section 1203.2.13. Ventilation needs to be in accordance with the International Mechanical Code. Liquid-tight floors shall be provided where hazardous materials are present. Buildings containing laboratory suites shall be equipped throughout with an approved automatic sprinkler system. Now, section 3805 is for non-sprinklered laboratories. Existing non-sprinklered laboratories shall comply with 3803 and chapters 50 through 67. Where approved by the fire code official, 25% of pyrophorics and class 4 oxidizers from table 5003.1.1 may be used in a non-sprinklered laboratory. This is allowed provided containers are sealed and stored per the manufacturer's guidelines in a cabinet or glove box with no incompatible materials stored in the cabinet. During the use of normally restricted pyrophorics or class 4 oxidizers, they must be used in a UL-listed fume hood. All combustibles are not directly related to the research must be 2 feet away from the work area, and a portable fire extinguisher, portable extinguisher for the material needs to be within 20 feet. An automatic fire detection system shall be installed in non-sprinkler buildings using restricted materials. This system shall be connected to the building's fire alarm panel and activate occupant notification. The percentage of MAQs shall be permitted to increase in accordance with Table 3805.4. Section 3806, existing sprinkler laboratories. The existing sprinkler laboratories still need to comply with Chapter 50 through 67 and Section 3806. MAQs for existing sprinkler laboratories shall be in accordance with Table 3803.2.1. The next chapter is processing and extraction facilities. This is Chapter 39. A new chapter has been added to the IFC to specifically regulate the process of extracting oils from plant material. Chapter 39 is a new chapter focused on the processing and extraction of oils and fats from various plants. This process includes extraction by the use of solvent, desolventizing the raw material, production of the miscela, distillation of the solvent from the miscela, and solvent recovery. The processes used are not necessarily typical hazardous material processes, and often the systems and equipment associated with such processes are not listed. Because of the typical lack of listing, the systems and equipment need specific approvals for the installation. The chapter provides the tools to appropriately address the hazard while also meeting the unique needs of industry. This chapter has provisions for technical report prepared by a registered design professional, and it requires site inspection to make sure that the equipment and systems are installed as designed and approved. So the scope of this chapter is plant processing or extraction facilities shall comply with this chapter and the IBC. Permits is 3901.3. Permits are required as set forth in section 105.6 and 105.7. Section 3903, processing and extraction. Extraction is prohibited in any building containing a group A, E, I, or R occupancy. The extraction needs to occur in a room dedicated to extraction. Heating or pressurizing of the miscela needs to be done in an appliance listed for such use. It may not be done in a cooking appliance not listed for the process. Where flammable and combustible liquids for extraction are boiled, distilled, or evaporated, it shall be within the hazardous exhaust fume hood. Open flame heating is prohibited. LPG may not be released into the atmosphere. Section 3904, systems and equipment. All systems and equipment shall comply with this chapter, the IBC and the IMC. The equipment shall be listed or approved for specific use. If no listing is available, a registered design professional shall prepare a report for review and approval of the fire code official. Technical report needs to be approved prior to equipment installation. The report shall include content outlined in 3904.3.1. Site inspection completed by an approved professional shall be conducted, ensuring the installation matches the report. Section 3905, safety systems. Where flammable gases or solvents are used, a gas detection system shall be provided that alarms at 25% of the lower flammable limit. The system shall be listed or approved, calibrated for the specific gases used. The alarm activation shall initiate audible and visual signals in the extraction room. The alarm shall deactivate heating within the extraction room and activate mechanical ventilation. Electrical components within the extraction room shall be deactivated upon gas detection. An emergency shutoff shall be provided. So it's my understanding that this chapter came about because of trying to regulate the marijuana industry in other states. And it just gives us some guidelines because they're doing things that were previously not allowed, so this makes it where we can do it safely. Any questions on any of my sections?
One question on all the ruling on laboratories. Is that going to give you guys the tools to better regulate the colleges on their laboratories and making them have stuff there for you to be able to review if you get a call to their facility?
They, the labs that I deal with have moved in that direction. We did have a fire in one a year ago, and that evening, within hours, it was knocked out, but within hours they could tell us what was in that room. We are still working. I think that if they use Chapter 38 here, right? I like that it spells out what, like, I'm not the expert, the chemists are, and they need to come up with a plan and then walk us through it. And the inventory is really important to us, knowing what's there, being able to get that in a timely fashion. And that's the only way we can measure them against the IFC is if they report. Otherwise, I'm going bottle by bottle trying to figure out what chemical falls into what category.
Yeah, it's
So-
kind of a hazmat nightmare, especially when you got to go with the interactions between all those little
Right.
quantities.
So I have special experts that come with me during my laboratory inspections.
Okay.
They help me identify incompatibles. They help me identify the storage issues. One of the things that I read here was the materials that when you open them, they should be dated.
Mm-hmm.
That's been something that we've already been writing up just because the laboratory specialists were telling me, like, hey, we need to require this. This
They
needs to be
become more
part of our
dangerous
plan.
as they age. Yeah.
Right. So
Okay.
we are still working forward on the labs, but I have confidence in my special experts.
Chairman
Okay.
Dietrich. I actually wanted to just comment too on that too, because what's interesting is that Jamie presented you 2 new chapters today, and chapter 39, which is kind of typical of what we see when we see a new chapter where we're trying to add some regulation because of new industry or something, and the code's kind of trying to catch up. Chapter 38 is a little unique with that higher education laboratories because what they're really trying to do is ease it a little bit for the colleges, because when we're enforcing previously, we have to enforce through the maximum allowable quantities and the hazardous materials chapters, which are really set up for industry and manufacture and that. And so when you have a building from 1920 or 1912, these old laboratories that are doing the same thing, but the chemicals they've used over the past 100 years have changed dramatically. And so they created a new chapter that said, you can step into chapter 38 and follow these rules as a laboratory, or you can follow the existing hazardous materials rules. And so that's why it got to be kind of long, because they really laid it out and said, all right, we understand you have old buildings, non-sprinklered, so we relax some of this if you follow all this other stuff. Whereas like pyrophorics, for example, are not allowed at all in a non-sprinkler building. That's one of the requirements. They said, okay, we'll relax that as long as your container size and labeling and all these other requirements to make it safe in a laboratory. So it's kind of yet to be seen what what will happen after we adopt this, if they choose to step over into this chapter, or if they're going to continue and operate where they're at.
And that has been a huge challenge for them when we applied, when we kind of got a grip on that some of these materials. We had some materials where you can only have 4 pounds of it in the entire building, and then some where you can't have any. And when we found that in those buildings, it was like, well, this has to be removed completely. And now they'll be able to have very, very small amounts for their experiments.
In your guys' opinion of how this got set up, does it put you within the ability to control an issue with the sizes of the chemical that they went to now?
I think the big thing here is that it gives them a better opportunity to come into compliance, because so many of these buildings, it was just so difficult, because when you go into hazardous materials, they want you to put all your chemicals on the first floor. And most of these spaces are set up with classrooms on the first floor, laboratories above. So they're already restricted down that way. Well, if you follow hazardous materials and you do it the way they want, and you put the worst stuff on the bottom and then put all your classrooms up top, you've now kind of created a problem where everybody that needs to evacuate has to come down through the most hazardous spaces. So I think the code's really trying to, how do we deal with this? And that's why you see some of that language about laboratory suites and, let's create areas that they can confine this to, understanding that these are also classrooms. It's just really unique, and I think that's why you see it pulled out to a separate chapter. And I think this will help us in terms of, any higher ed laboratory, bringing them towards compliance.
Okay, that's good, thank you.
Thank you.
One thing to note here too then is chapters, you'll see in your book, but chapters 40 through 49, they're reserved, so that's why you don't see any handouts for that. And then we'll move right to chapter 50 with Inspector Severson.
Good morning.
Morning.
I've got chapters 50 through 60. Again, I'll just be covering the significant changes in these chapters, which are highlighted in your handout. So we'll start with chapter 50, hazardous materials, table 5003.1.1, subsection 1. They have removed consumer fireworks from table 5003.1.1, subsection 1, as they are now consolidated into their own category under the fireworks definition and the requirements of chapter 56, which is your explosives and fireworks chapter anyway. This removes a 100% increase, which was 125 to 250 pounds, granted in a sprinkler building, and will now require any building exceeding the MEQ of 125 pounds to be classified as a Group H Division 3, which like an H3 building, and then they'll have to meet those requirements for the fireworks. Table 5003.1.1, subsection 1, footnote K. Footnote K has increased the allowable amounts of Class 3 oxidizers used for maintenance, operations, or sanitation of equipment from 200 pounds of solid to 220 pounds of solids, and 20 gallons of liquids to 22 gallons of liquids. They made this change to coincide with the new packaging methods that will align with the international metric system. So they just increased that because the metric system, the measurements kind of equal out with the metric system. That was kind of why they made the change there. We'll move forward to section 5003.8.3.4, fire resistant rating. Added group 4 construction, which I believe is our heavy timber construction, to the exception of a 1-hour fire resistant rated floor. Supporting the control area, if both subsections are met. I believe this change was made to match the building code with the heavy timber construction. Table 5003.11.1, maximum allowable quantity per indoor and outdoor control area in group M and S occupancies. Here again, they increase the amounts of the table for physical hazard materials, non-flammable and non-combustible solids and liquids from 1,150 pounds solids to 1,350, and 115 gallons liquid to 135 gallons liquid, and that was again to align with the metric system, just to make those measurements coincide. So there wasn't such a big difference there between the metric system and the other system. 5005.1.12, emergency isolation. This section was removed from section 5003.2.2.1, item 6 in the 2015 International Fire Code to this section. It now only requires hazardous gases and liquids over their MAQs and are pressurized to over 15 psig to meet the leak detection and emergency shutoff requirement. This would require them to be in a Group H occupancy. Chapter 51, aerosols. Section 5103.2, identification. They changed the wording to cartons or outer packaging shall be identified on no fewer than one exterior side with the classification level of the aerosol products contained within the carton. So now they have to actually have one, at least if it's a carton, one side has to show what classification of the aerosol is, or it's a class 1, 2, or class 3. So at least one side has to have that identification on it. Section 5104.1.2, plastic aerosol X products. This section added for aerosols in containers larger than 4 fluid ounces and do not meet the criteria of section, this is a typo, it should be 5104.1.1. They will be classified as an aerosol X product because of their flammability criteria and shall be prohibited in higher life hazard occupancies, which I've just got written down. It would be an A, B, E, F, I, and an R. So it basically restricts them to like a H or an S occupancy because of their flammability rating. Aerosol cooking spray products, so that's 5104.3.3. Section added for requirements for storage configurations, quantities, and protection in accordance with NFPA 30B for cooking spray aerosols in general purpose warehouses. Moving along here to 5104.8, 5104.8.1, and 5104.8.2. This relates to the storage of aerosol cooking spray products and mixed storage and storage conditions. These sections added for the requirements of aerosol cooking spray products in mixed storage general purpose warehouses and the requirement to comply again with NFPA 30B. Section 5106.2.2 and 5106.2.3, aerosol cooking spray storage and fire protection and display of aerosol products. Okay, the summary, they changed the section 5106.2.2 to fire protection requirements for aerosol cooking spray storage, and they moved display of aerosol products to section 5106.2.3. And they've changed the wording in section 5106.2.3 from aerosol containers to aerosol products, and from aerosol array to aerosol product array. The wording changed there. Moving on to chapter 53, compressed gases, section 5306.1, general. They deleted, you have to bear with me on this one, I don't know if I'll get this word right. Inhalation or sedation, including but not limited to analgesia systems for dentistry, podiatry. And then they've changed that and they made it patient or veterinary care. And then they've added section 427 of the International Building Code for a reference. I believe these are like our medical gas rooms, like in dental offices and veterinary clinics and hospitals. 5306.2, here again, the interior supply location. They just changed the wording from stored to located. 5306.2.2, 1 hour interior room. They added a specific fire barrier and horizontal assembly requirements in accordance with section 707 and 711 of the International Building Code and opening protection requirements. Section 5307, this section has been moved from section 5308 to 5307 and renamed for carbon dioxide systems used in dispensing allocations. That's what it was formerly named, to compressed gases not otherwise regulated. Sections 5307 and 5308 were combined and made into one section in the 2018 code. 2 exceptions were added to section 5307.2, ventilation, and section 5307.2.1, gas detection systems were also added. 5307 5707.3, insulated liquid carbon dioxide systems used in beverage dispensing applications. This section was renamed insulated liquid carbon dioxide systems used in beverage dispensing to be more consistent with the language of NFPA 55, compressed gases and cryogenic fluids code. 5307.3.1, ventilation. This section was modified to clarify that where ventilation is provided, it must be designed to ventilate all areas where released carbon dioxide could accumulate. It also references section 5004.3 for the requirements that must be met for ventilation. 5307.3.2, gas detection system. This section changed from section 5307.5.2, emergency alarm system, to section 5707.3.2, gas detection system, and specifies the requirements that must be met for a gas detection system. 5307.4, carbon dioxide enrichment systems. This section added to the fire code to regulate the use of carbon dioxide enrichment systems in the indoor growing process of marijuana. These systems are used to stimulate the growth of the marijuana plants in the indoor growing facilities and thus increase the chance for leaks and possibility of asphyxiation hazards. The requirements are only for systems that contain more than 100 pounds of carbon dioxide or when the refill connection is remote from the tank or vessel. There again, it's the medicinal marijuana. I think we're going to be seeing, we have one site going up south, well, it'll be in the city of Fargo, but they've added this just because we're seeing that all over the country, so they've added this to the code for those kinds of processes. 5307.4.1 through 5307.4.7, these sections added for the requirements that must be met for the use of the carbon dioxide enhancement systems and used for the marijuana growing facilities. Chapter 54, corrosive material, there were no changes made to this chapter. There was no significant changes to Chapter 55, the cryogenic fluids. Chapter 56, I don't believe there was any significant changes. Chapter 57, we have an amendment. This is the flammable and combustible liquid chapter. Section 5704.2.9.6.1, location where above-ground tanks are prohibited. Locations where above-ground tanks are prohibited, storage of class 1 and 2 liquids in above-ground tanks outside of buildings is prohibited within the limits established by law as limits of districts in which such storage is prohibited. We've added this amendment: above-ground tanks outside of buildings shall be installed only in areas zoned industrial or limited industrial and shall be located at least 300 feet from all non-industrial zone districts. This was added to clarify language that is currently in the Land Development Code in regards to the placement of above-ground tanks. There again, we don't want these things going in all over the place. We try to regulate which zones they can put these above-ground tanks in. Another amendment, 5704.2.13.1.4, tanks abandoned in place. The summary of this one, we added number 7 to this. Site assessment is required to determine if there are any spills, leaks, or discharge from the tank system. Records of site assessment shall be kept on the site of the tank location. So here, when we have say a gas station closes down and they have the underground tanks, they have a option of either removing them or abandoning them in place. So we added this amendment that way. If they abandon them in place, they do all the testing and stuff. All that paperwork's got to be kept with that property forever. Same if they remove them and there's contamination, then all that's got to be maintained on the site. So we've added that. They have to have a site assessment, whether they remove it or abandon it, and then all that information stays there. Say somebody comes down the line and they want a site evaluation, we try to keep track of that. There should be one on the site too, explaining if the tanks were in the ground or if they had any contamination. That's why we want that amendment or that section added there. Section 5705.3.7.5.1, ventilation. The exception to section 5705.3.7.5.1 is amended to read as follows. They have the number 1, where natural ventilation can be shown to be effective for materials used, dispensed or mixed. We've added number 2. When approved by the fire chief, continuous ventilation may be provided for 1 complete air change per hour if supplemented with mechanical ventilation designed to provide for a complete air exchange 6 times per hour. The non-continuous ventilation equipment and any lighting fixture shall be operated by the same switch located outside the door. Section 5707, on-demand mobile fueling operations. This is a fairly new trend. It's kind of started up across the country. This section added to provide requirements for guidelines for the safe operation of the emerging mobile fuel industry. What I've read on the research, they take pickups and put tanks in the back, and they'll come into your place of employment and fill your car up for you. You don't even have to go to the gas station anymore. So they've added this to try to get a jump on these mobile fueling operations. So I don't think we've seen any here in Fargo yet, but usually what starts somewhere else usually will make its way here. Somebody will try it eventually. So they've added this just to try to get a jump on it. Chapter 58, flammable gases and flammable cryogenic fluids. Here again we have an amendment, 5806.2, limitations. This is similar to the other amendment. A limitation storage of flammable cryogenic fluids in stationary containers outside of buildings is prohibited within the limits established by law as the limits of districts in which such storage is prohibited. Stationary containers shall be installed only in areas zoned industrial or limited industrial and shall be located at least 300 feet from all non-industrial zoning districts. Again, here it clarifies the language regarding the flammable cryogenic fluids and places the same restrictions that currently exist for the installation of above-ground tanks. So here again, we kind of want to keep an eye on, we don't want these things going up all over the place. That's why we've added this, they can only put these things up in certain zones, light industrial or industrial. Then if they're abutted up to another zone, they'd have to be at least, the tank itself would have to be at least 300 feet from, say, a commercial or any other zones. So we try to catch that right up front when somebody approaches us to install a tank. That's usually the first thing we do is say, what's the address? We look up the zoning to see if they can actually put it on the property. And then if they can, we look at the zones around there to see if they have to meet the 300 feet buffer zone there for these things. Chapter 59, there was no changes. And 60, I don't think there was any significant changes. So that, in a nutshell, that wraps up 50 to 60. I don't know if you guys have any questions or anything on any of that, or?
Would you mind stating your name for the minutes?
Oh, Rob
Rob.
Severson, Severson. Sorry about that.
Thank you. No, that's fine.
Thank you, Rob.
All good? Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Inspector Dawn Stallenwork. I'll be presenting chapters 61 through 80. As you can see, they're short. I'll only be presenting the significant changes in the Fargo amendments. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me as we're going. The first technical change and amendment is found on page 478, section 6103.2.1.6. Use with self-contained torch assemblies, and now this is in chapter 61, which is liquefied petroleum gas. There was a technical change in the section, so the section says use of self-contained torch assemblies. Portable LP gas containers are allowed to be used to supply approved self-contained torch assemblies or similar appliances. Such containers shall not exceed a water capacity of 2.7 pounds. That's an increase from the 2.5 pounds. We are proposing to carry through our previous amendment to increase this to 12 pounds. It's a long-standing amendment that we've had in the code. Next, moving on to page 470, still on 478, but section 6104.2, maximum capacity within established limits. This is an amendment that we've had in the past and would like to carry through. The section currently reads, maximum capacity within established limits. Within the limits established by law restricting the storage of liquefied petroleum gas for the protection of heavily populated or congested areas, the aggregate capacity of any one installation shall not exceed 2,000 gallons. We would like to add unprotected tanks with a water capacity exceeding 2,000 gallons shall be installed only in areas zoned industrial or limited industrial and shall be located at least 300 feet from all non-industrial zoning districts. This clarifies the language regarding LPG storage and places the same restrictions that currently exist for installation of above-ground tanks. Significant change found on page 479, section 6104.3, container location, and this is regarding a table. This is adding footnote G to clarify and specify separation distances between above-ground LPG gas containers and public ways. It indicates that 2,000 water gallon capacity or less shall not be located less than 5 feet from a public way. 2,000 water gallon water capacity or more will be in accordance with the table. In previous codes, this distance was anywhere from 0 to 3 feet from the public way, so we're just, that change is going to increase that distance a little bit. The rest of the chapter, there's nothing significant. Chapter 62, organic peroxides, no significant changes or amendments. Chapter 63, oxidizers, oxidizing gases, and oxidizing cryogenic fluids, no changes. 64, pyrophoric materials, no changes. Chapter 65, peroxylene, cellulose nitrate plastics, no changes. Chapter 66, unstable reactive materials, no changes. 67, water reactive solids and liquids, no changes. And that's all I have. Any questions? All right, thank you.
Okay, so the only other thing we have remaining are the appendix. And you heard from the building code, they don't adopt the appendixes in the building code, but we do pick up 3 of the appendix in the fire code. And so I can just run through those quickly here. There's really no changes, but I just want to call your attention to the ones we do adopt. So Appendix A, we do not adopt. Appendix B is adopted, and you'll see that Appendix B and Appendix C both are related to fire flow, and we adopt these. They assist with requiring hydrants, and so that we can comply with like ISO requirements. Appendix B, there's no significant changes. Appendix C is also adopted with no significant changes. Appendix D is the third appendix that we adopt. We do, there's one change here and then one amendment that I just want to call out. So Appendix D, fire apparatus access roads, is adopted and enacted in its entirety. If you turn to section D 103.1, access road width with a hydrant, we have an amendment that we brought in with the 2015 code that we'd like to continue, and that's to delete section D 103.1 in its entirety. And this was a section that required the access road to widen out to 26 feet when it got close to a hydrant. We feel the 20-foot access road is adequate for what we need. So if you look right below there, there's a little template or drawing that shows what they're referring to. So we'd like to carry that amendment forward and continue to delete that section. The remaining appendix we do not adopt, and they're contained in the code primarily for information use only. So with that, that concludes all chapters of the fire code.
Thank you. Do we have any other staff reports? Hearing none, call for a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We're adjourned.